Part 56. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 551. Royal Grandmother, Xianyuan Yan was really scared, struggling desperately, and looked at the Queen Mother for help. Royal Grandma, help me. Xiejin will kill me, he will definitely kill me. Don't worry, young Master Yan. The assassination case in the Imperial Study Room is of great importance, and I have no right to touch you. Xiejin smiled faintly, seeming to comfort him gently, but in fact, every word he said made Xianyuan Yan tremble. Now you just go to the criminal department and wait until Her Majesty the Queen and the Prince Regent come back to deal with the case. With that said, he bowed to the Empress Dowager and raised his hand to signal the Imperial Army to escort the two of them away. The Queen Mother watched helplessly as Xianyuan Yan was taken away, her face extremely ugly, but she could do nothing. Not to mention her now, even in the past, the harem was not allowed to interfere in politics. Moreover, the Supreme Emperor had no intention of intervening. Even if she wanted to keep Xianyuan Yan, it was impossible for the legitimate son of the Xie family to agree. The Queen Mother closed her eyes. This feeling of abdicating the throne before the emperor died was really terrible. With the change of imperial power, the old emperor became a complete idler. He no longer had the right to interfere in the affairs of the court, and he could not even save his own grandson. She really wanted to ask him, what had he gained from being the emperor for decades? Do you really want to watch your favorite grandson being executed by the powerful regent? The imperial troops brought by Xiejin quickly withdrew. The Queen Mother stood alone in the night wind, staring at the gate of Yang'an Palace that had not yet been closed. She was exhausted. The palace people standing around had their heads lowered and were as respectful and silent as stone sculptures. The Queen Mother turned her head and looked at the main hall of Yang'an Palace. After a moment of silence, she walked towards the main hall. The palace attendants were on the left and right. The Supreme Emperor was leaning alone on the large brocade couch in the palace, his eyes slightly closed, looking tired and weak, with a haggard and pale look on his face. The old steward next to him knelt on the ground and squeezed his legs. The room was so quiet that you could hear a pin drop. The Queen Mother walked and sat down on the bamboo couch opposite her, and said in a calm voice, "Your Majesty, you don't want to ask, why did Yandere appear in my concubine's palace? The title emperor has become a habit. They have been married for decades, and she has been called this for decades. It is difficult to change her name." The Supreme Emperor seemed to be asleep and did not respond for a long time. The Queen Mother was not in a hurry, she just sat and waited, her eyes falling on his old and wrinkled face for a moment. "What do you have to ask?" The Emperor's voice was deep, a little disappointed and a little bored. "I have already given him a chance." The Queen Mother tightened her hand on the veil and said calmly, "Has the Emperor ever had any regrets about taking Nan 11 back to the throne?" "Regret?" The Supreme Emperor slowly opened his eyes and sat up with the help of the old steward. "Why do you regret it?" "King Wei, your biological son, Yandere, and your biological grandson will be killed one by the regent in the near future." The Queen Mother gritted her teeth coldly. Can the Emperor really be indifferent to this? The palace servants offered teacups, bowed and stood aside. "So what do you think I should do?" The Supreme Emperor picked up the teacup and took a sip slowly, his every move showing fatigue. "Protect them unconditionally, no matter how rebellious they have done." The Queen Mother's expression changed. "After being an emperor for decades, I have never felt that I have done anything worthy of praise." The Supreme Emperor laughed at himself. After all, the emperor has too many things to do, for the world, for the common people, and for the royal family. A wise monarch should think I have done everything I have done with a clear conscience, but these are not worthy of praise because this is what the emperor should have done. The Queen Mother looked at him in confusion. "But by accepting the High Priest's proposal and taking Nan 11 back from the Great Zhou dynasty, I think it is the most correct and wise decision I have made." The Queen Mother was shocked. "Your Majesty. If Yana really wants to become the emperor, I am afraid that the peace and prosperity that Dongling has maintained for hundreds of years will be destroyed in his hands. A stupid and incompetent head of the family can bring about the decline of the family. The stupid and cruel king of a country can be enough to destroy it. A country has plunged all the people in the world into disaster. The supreme emperor raised his hand and rubbed his eyebrows. There are so many descendants of the royal family, why did I choose Yandere as the crown prince? The queen mother clenched her hands tightly and could not say a word. The supreme emperor glanced at her. Did you know in advance that Nanny Wei and Yandere went to the imperial study room together? The queen mother was silent for a moment and slowly shook her head. If I had known that he did such a risky thing, I would not have allowed the emperor to let him live in the palace. And Aunt Wei? After a moment of pause, she closed her eyes and smiled bitterly. Yandere has been close to her since she was a child. From the first day when Nan 11 and Rongyu returned to Dongling, Nanny Wei has never given up and has been unwilling to let others take away what belongs to Yandere. The location. So she encouraged Yandere to steal the jade seal and stabbed the eunuch with the palm print. The queen mother's expression changed. Also, what is the position that belongs to Yandere? The supreme emperor said coldly. The capable person in Dongling's country occupies it. She thinks that the throne is Xian Yuanyan's private property. The queen mother gently pursed her lips and said nothing. Although you didn't know about it beforehand, you still protected him afterwards, the emperor said calmly. It's a pity that no amount of protection can stop Yandere from seeking death on his own. The queen mother's fingertips trembled, and a feeling of powerlessness suddenly swept over her, making her physically and mentally exhausted. There was silence in the hall for a moment. This pair of emperors and empresses, who have been in the palace for decades, have been in power for decades. They have gone through ups and downs for so many years. They have experienced the open and secret fights, intrigues, and conspiracies in the harem before they ascended the throne. Fake love. Sitting on a high seat, they dare not relax at any time, maintaining the most noble and gorgeous appearance, holding their heads high, making everyone crawl at their feet. But now that they have taken off their glory, they find that they are just mortals. No matter how much power they have, they cannot protect their children and grandchildren who they care about most. Isn't this a kind of sadness? The entrance to the secret passage in Wei Ma's ear room. See if you can find someone to deal with it and seal the entrance and exit. The emperor lay back on the wide couch and closed his eyes, obviously not wanting to say anything more. As for the imperial seal they robbed, while Nan 11 and Rongyu are not back yet, send it back to the imperial study quickly, otherwise, not to mention Yandere, the Wei Wang family will not be able to escape death at that time. The queen mother was stunned and shook her head slowly. I don't know where the imperial seal is. The emperor frowned. Didn't you ask Wei Ma? After they came out of the secret passage, Madame Wei was anxious to destroy the blood-stained clothes, but she was not allowed to light a fire in the palace without permission, and she did not dare to take it to the kitchen to burn it, so she hid it, and then somehow, the clothes were found. The queen mother put her hands on her legs and clenched her handkerchief tightly. Time was too tight. I forgot to ask about the jade seal. The assassination just happened in the imperial study. If Madame Wei set fire to the clothes, it would definitely arouse suspicion. There are many spies in the palace. Even in Yong'an Palace, as the queen mother, she dare not guarantee that it is absolutely safe. Author's words. Another chapter will be updated in the early morning, and this plot will end soon. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 552. Besides, the secret passage under the imperial study was narrow, long and winding. It was noon when Wei Mama brought Xian Yuanyan out. They were so nervous that they quickly changed their clothes and hid themselves, paying attention to the movements outside. They were even more afraid that there were heirs behind the wall, so they spoke carefully. How dare they talk about the hiding place of the jade seal without authorization? So, she actually knew about it? The emperor looked at her deeply and was really speechless. He could never have imagined that at this time, when he had abdicated for a year and the new emperor had ascended the throne for more than a year, there were still people who did such a stupid thing under his nose. When the incident happened in the imperial study, Xiejin was not present. However, in such a short period of time, ordinary people would have to mobilize a large number of troops to investigate the case for several days. However, he directly brought people to Yong'an Palace to arrest people, and accurately found the evidence of Wei Ma's guilt. It is enough to show that the regent has an omnipotent hand in the palace, and his spies are everywhere. He spoke slowly. The secret passage can certainly make Yandere move more smoothly and temporarily avoid other people's sight, but once the matter gets out of hand, how easy is it to hide the movements of any part of the palace from the eyes of those spies? The Queen Mother's face was visibly depressed, so there is no way now. Whoever caused the trouble should bear it himself. The emperor raised his hand tiredly. It's late at night, you should go back and rest. After the voice fell, the Queen Mother suddenly lost all her strength. Xiejin, Xiejin, let me out. In the innermost single cell of the Ministry of Justice, Xianyuan grabbed the solid wooden railing and roared, "You framed this prince, and the emperor will not forgive you. Let me out, let me out. You want to live a peaceful life, but you choose to die. Do you really think you can sit on the throne by robbing the jade seal? It's ridiculous." Xiejin stood outside the cell with his hands behind his back. His delicate and noble eyebrows looked cold under the dim light of the cell, and even the smile on the corner of his lips was cold and sarcastic. "You don't even know your own weight, and you dare to covet the throne." Xianyuan stared at Xiejin with resentment. He really regretted not executing the legitimate son of the Xie family who never took him seriously when he was still the crown prince. "Xiejin, you will not die well. Whether I die well or not, Master Yan probably won't be able to see it," Xiejin said calmly, "but I can see how Master Yan died." After saying this, he turned around and ordered, "Take good care of Master Yan in the next 2 days. If he gets into an accident before Her Majesty the Queen and the Regent come back, be careful that your heads will be moved." He had Xianyuan and Madame Wei locked up separately, Xianyuan in the men's cell and Madame Wei in the women's cell, so the two had no chance to collude with each other. The guards who were transferred to guard the prison overnight were all shocked, bowed their heads and accepted the order, and then dispersed in an orderly manner, guarding the cells inside and outside tightly to ensure that not a mosquito could fly out. Xiejin wanted to say something else, but his eyes fell on Xianyuan's gloomy and pale face in the cell. He was silent for a moment, and then raised the corners of his lips coldly. Disdain, ridicule, contempt. Such a stupid and incompetent waste. Apart from taking shortcuts and wishful thinking, does he really have any ability to fly into the sky and hide in the ground? Xiejin turned and walked out of the cell, turning a deaf ear to Xianyuan's hysterical shouting behind him. The upright young man stood at the exit with bright lights, silently looking at the sky. His profile was elegant and refined. If it weren't for the straight posture that only the well-trained soldiers in the barracks had, he really didn't look like a military general. Such an outstanding young man, with a handsome face, is a leopard-like body and an upright and kind character. Even his temper is cute. How can it not make people's heart move? Xiejin stopped to admire for a moment, with the corners of his lips slightly raised, and walked up the narrow stone steps one by one. The young man turned around when he heard the voice, his eyes fell on him, and his eyebrows were slightly frowned. "Is it over?" "What else can I do?" Xiejin said indifferently. "I am a little surprised that the emperor didn't stop it." If the emperor was determined to protect Xianyuan, there would be a stalemate tonight. No matter how arrogant Xiejin was, he was unwilling to draw a sword in front of the emperor, so it was obviously pleasing to be able to resolve this matter peacefully. Xianyuan didn't make a scene. "Of course he did." Xiejin smiled faintly. "I'm not so overbearing as to shut his mouth. He can make as much noise as he wants and shout as much as he wants. He will stop when he gets tired. At this point, he tilted his head and glanced at the handsome young man beside him. Both of you are sons of the royal family and are of similar age, so why are you two so different? Xian Yuanyao was slightly stunned by such a compliment, and then looked at him expressionlessly. A dragon gives birth to 9 sons, and each son is different. My father and the king of Wei are brothers. They all have different personalities, not to mention that Xian Yuanyan and I are cousins. You have so many sons in the Xie family, aren't they all different? Xie Jin smiled. Yao Yao has become much more eloquent recently. I learned it from you, Xian Yuanyao said calmly. The noble sons of the imperial capital are all foxes. They have to beat around the bush when they say something, and they talk like women. I have long said that you are all used to fighting in the harem, keeping the wonderful dust, and it is as lively as a big show every day. Even if there are so many conspiracies and intrigues that people die is commonplace, it is still lively. Xie Jin's expression is strange. Is Yao Yao mocking me, or expressing his dissatisfaction with the sons of the imperial capital? Xian Yuanyao was silent. I am just telling the truth. The two of them walked outside the palace together. It was obvious that they had just finished the case and arrested someone, but the atmosphere seemed to be particularly good at this time. Xie Jin even hoped that the road out of the palace could be longer. Along the way, groups of imperial guards greeted them and walked past them with a half salute. The patrolling and defense in the palace became tense to the naked eye. After leaving the palace, Yao Yao should go directly back to the military camp. Xie Jin was a little reluctant, but he didn't want to be emotional at the moment. I will handle the other aftermath matters. Hearing this, Xian Yuanyao glanced at him sideways. What? Are you finally afraid? Xie Jin was indeed afraid. I was afraid that the little leopard would be implicated, and I couldn't bear to make him frightened. Xie Jin sighed. Who asked me to neglect my duties? But it will be aggravated. After you return to the military camp, train well and don't leave the camp without permission. Otherwise, the Lord will accuse us of secretly giving and receiving. Besides, if I seduce you into not doing your job properly, I'm afraid it's hard to say whether I can save my life. Xian Yuanyao sneered. So you still know that you are tempting me to not do my job properly. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 553. Xie Jin looked at his cute look. His hands were itchy and he couldn't help but want to pinch his face. But this is in the palace, and the influence is not good. Xie Jin regretfully resisted the urge to feel itchy and said warmly, I'm a coward. Yao Yao, please stop making fun of me. Is he timid? He dared to speak, but Xian Yuanyao didn't dare to listen. But at this time, he was really in no mood to argue with him. Looking at the sky, he turned to look at Xie Jin. Your body should be able to bear it, right? Xie Jin was silent for a moment, thinking that he had asked Chu Nanyi to detoxify him for 2 months, and for a moment he felt childish. It had only been a few days, and the palace was already in a mess. If he really stayed at home for 2 months, he couldn't imagine what the consequences would be. Xie Jin sighed. It's nothing serious. I will settle this case temporarily tomorrow and resume court affairs earlier. Xian Yuanchen was injured. Let him recuperate in the palace for 2 days. I will have to pay more for the imperial study room, have some snacks, and let Chu Nanyi come over in the evening to apply acupuncture to remove the remaining poison. Xian Yuanyao hummed, then I'll go back first. Don't be too pushy yourself. Rest when you need to rest. If you can't solve some problems by yourself, go to the chief assistant for help. He is your father. Yao Yao. Xie Jin interrupted him calmly, you are really like a little daughter-in-law who cares about her husband. Xian Yuanyao's face turned green and he glared at him viciously. Xie Jin smiled so enchantingly, even if it's for Yao Yao, I will definitely take care of myself, Yao Yao can rest assured. Xian Yuanyao was too lazy to talk to him anymore and walked quickly towards the palace gate. Xiejin followed leisurely behind him, watching the little leopard's strong and slender back, with a smile on his face and a silent sigh. If he wasn't afraid of implicating this guy, he really wanted to lock him next to him day and night, and he could see him when he raised his head and lowered his eyebrows. But even though he acted recklessly for a few days, Xiejin knew full well that generals were not allowed to leave the military camp without receiving military orders. This matter is no joke. He himself is willful, but he cannot be willful with Xian Yuanyao. The two parted ways outside the palace gate. Returning to Jinyuan, the maid on night duty came forward to serve him respectfully. The maid who changed clothes, brought water, and the maid who made tea hurriedly brought tea to the master to soothe his throat. After Xiejin simply washed his hands and washed, he raised his hand and waved everyone away, leaving the room quiet. He sat in front of the window a little tiredly, looking out at the hazy night. Not really tired. It's just that things happened so suddenly that I had a moment to breathe, so that my mind could relax for a moment. But it can't be left empty for too long. Because he had to think carefully about how he could completely remove Xian Yuanyao from this matter after Her Majesty the Queen and the Prince Regent returned. Just thinking about it, even Xiejin, a deep-thinking fox, couldn't think of any feasible method for a while. Rong Yu's heart is as deep as the sea, and his heart is as hard as iron. Ordinary methods will not work for him, and any strategy in front of him will probably not work. The so-called tactics must be used on people who are not as scheming as yourself, but using tactics on Rong Yu is not asking for death. Admit your mistake and beg for mercy? Haha, begging for mercy must be effective before you become a ghost. Negotiate terms. Xiejin frowned, unable to think of any position to negotiate terms with Rong Yu. Rong Yu was the richest in the world, held great power, and lacked nothing. There is no shortage of capable ministers and generals, there is no shortage of cavalry and horses, Juxiao Pavilion is full of masters, and he is sitting on the world's wealth. Is there anything that can impress him? Xiejin helped his forehead, the master was too powerful and it made people panic. Unexpectedly, this master is still very infatuated, and he is very affectionate with Her Majesty the Queen. There has never been any resentment between the couple, and there is not even a chance for others to play their role. Therefore, the tried and tested method among men of gifting them with stunning beauties no longer works. Instead, it only adds fuel to the fire. Xiejin leaned against the brocade couch as if he had no bones, resting his chin on one hand, looking out the window at the dark night without saying a word, with a hint of worry between his brows. How can I take out Xian Yuanyao? This is a difficult question. Xiejin was troubled by this problem and stayed up half the night. The second half of the night passed very quickly. When it was dawn, the head of the Xie family had already washed and dressed and was planning to go to the palace. Although Her Majesty the Queen and the Prince Regent are not here and do not have to strictly follow the morning court time, Xie Chief Fu has become accustomed to abiding by the rules. Generally speaking, officials in charge of military power pay more attention to rules in their bones. Nothing can be an excuse for being lax. The Chief Minister and the Prime Minister take the lead in diligent work, how can other officials dare to slack off? But before leaving the house, he casually asked about the situation in Jinyuan, and heard a servant report that the young master had stayed up all night and sat alone at the window for half the night, looking very worried. Xie Xiaofu was simply stunned. Is Xie Ziaju worried? This is even more surprising than the red rain falling from the sky. Father stroked his chin and thought for a moment, wondering whether his son was worried about the progress of the case. Could there be something hidden in this case? Or, are you worried about how to win the heart of your sweetheart? After thinking for a while, but couldn't come up with any clues, Xie Xiaoxu decided to ask in person. When they arrived at Jinyuan, They saw the light still on in Xiaoju's house from a distance. The figure sitting by the window was undoubtedly Xiajin. Xia Shaofu became more and more suspicious. What on earth had troubled him all night? Walking to the window, he raised his hand and knocked. Xiajin, who was lost in thought, came back to his senses instantly, raised his eyes to look at his father standing outside the window, and raised his eyebrows slightly. Father hasn't entered the palace yet. It's winter, and the windows are not closed, so the cold wind blows all night. Xia Shaofu frowned, and stretched out his hand to touch his son's forehead. The body has not recovered yet, are you not worried about catching the cold again? Xiajin took his hand and said, I have a strong body, not that delicate. What are you worried about? Xia Shaofu was curious, isn't Xianyuan Yan already in prison? Xiajin sighed quietly. Xia Shaofu frowned, what happened? What kind of person does father think the regent is? Prince Regent, Mr. Xia was stunned, you ask me this question. Xiajin looked at him silently. Well, although we cannot discuss His Majesty and the regent in private, we can still communicate with each other as father and son. Xia Shaofu stroked his chin, the regent is a regent who is diligent and loves the people, and he is also dedicated and caring. A good responsible man. Xiajin's mouth twitched and his expression became a little weird, I'm not asking my father to film the political king's flattery. Even if you film the regent, you can't hear it, so what's the use? Presumptuous Xia Shaofu glared at him, do you talk to your father like this? Xiajin looked at him without saying a word. Well, if you want to ask about the regent's temperament, it must be unrivaled in the world in terms of ruthlessness and ruthlessness. He is cruel and hard-hearted. A person who is cruel to himself will naturally be more cruel to others and has a strong will. It cannot be transferred. When Xia Shaofu said this, he vaguely guessed where Xiajin's sadness came from. Are you worried that the regent will accuse you when he comes back? The author has something to say. I have something to do during the day today, so I updated it in advance. Good night, babies. Well, after the case came to an end, time progressed quickly. The regent was coming back soon. It was time for Xiaoju and Yao Baobao to tighten their skins. Window. Tabula equals window. Tabula. Tabula.push, mode, thumbs feed -01, container, tabula below article thumbnail -300x250, placement, below article thumbnail -300x250, target. Type, mix. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 554. Xiajin shook his head, I have nothing to worry about. Since I chose this path, I never thought it would go smoothly. I am worried about Xianyuan Yao. Don't expect to be comfortable working with a master like Rong Yu. Enjoying comfort has always been the privilege of corrupt officials. However, when faced with a master like Rong Yu, corrupt officials are destined not to live long. Therefore, before entering the officialdom, Xiajin had already thought about what he would face in the future, and he was even mentally prepared for the matter with Xianyuan Yao. The only thing he didn't expect was that the idiot Xianyuan Yan would cause trouble for him, and that Commander Yang, who couldn't understand the situation, would stab him on the sidelines, causing the death of several guards. The situation is serious, and a neglect of duty that could have been laughed off has become a serious mistake. There's nothing to think about. Xia Shaofu's tone was calm, obviously not thinking that this was an issue that needed to be entangled. No matter what the reason is, it is a fact that the two of you neglected your duties. You are pursuing your own affairs in your position and enjoying the benefits of this status. For your honor, you must bear corresponding responsibilities. As he said that, he couldn't help but touched his son's head again, as if to comfort him. If you neglect your duty, face it calmly. Nothing is more important than honesty and responsibility. Since his son grew up, he hadn't done such an action for a long time, and he couldn't help but feel nostalgic. Xiejin allowed him to show his tenderness as a loving father, and said in a light voice, "But Xian Yuanyao was dragged by me." "Being dragged down by you," Mr. Xie raised his eyebrows. "He was willing to do it, wasn't he? No one was forcing him with a knife." Of course, if someone really forced him with a knife, the proud little leopard might just stab the person who forced him to death. Xiejin frowned. "What my father said is not very pleasant to hear. He is your future daughter-in-law. How can your father be so cold and heartless?" Xie Xiaofu expressed non-committal about having a man as his daughter-in-law. "Jin'er, when you were attracted to him, you knew exactly what kind of person you like." Xie Xiaofu put his hands on his hands. "He is not a delicate daughter flower that needs your constant care. If you want to fight side by side with him, you can't always try to protect him, as this will destroy his pride sooner or later." There was a slight pause in his tone. "The men in the military camp are proud and have backbone. They are fierce horses on the galloping grassland and eagles soaring in the sky. They are not weak young men raised in brocades who can only coy. You have to understand this. Maybe it won't be so confusing." Xiejin remained silent. "My father has to go to the palace, you should think about it yourself," Xie Xiaofu said. "There is no need to get into trouble, you just need to change your perspective and think about it from Xian Yuanyao's point of view, and you will understand that your worries at the moment are unnecessary." Xiejin raised his eyes. "Can father really recognize my feelings for Xian Yuanyao?" Xie Xiaofu stroked his chin and asked instead, "If I don't approve, will you give up?" Xiejin said, "No." "Isn't that enough?" Xie Xiaofu smiled lightly. "Since I know you won't give up easily, why should I oppose you? In the end, if father and son turn against each other because of this matter, it will be more gain than loss. But most people in the world cannot accept it. The world is the world, and we are us." Xie Xiaofu sneered. "My father is now the first minister of the first rank, and he has to do many things every day. How can he have time to pay attention to what those unimportant people say? There are only mediocre and idle people. Talented people will have nothing to do all day long, always thinking about criticizing things that have nothing to do with them, in order to show their superiority to others." Father Xiejin interrupted him with a strange expression. "The tone of your words is very similar to my mother's. This should be my mother's line." Xie Xiaofu's expression was just like that, and then he looked at him lightly. "The cold wind blew in the middle of the night, so take a hot bath and sleep quickly. I will handle the affairs in the palace for you, and you can get up and deal with the aftermath by yourself in the afternoon." Without saying anything more, he turned around and left. Xiejin silently watched his back and couldn't help but smile. He is lucky to have such an open-minded and tolerant father and mother. Things in the palace are not over yet. The king of Wei and his wife had been restless since they left the palace last night, as anxious as ants on a hot pot. They kept asking for news in the palace. However, Xiejin left the palace after finishing his work. After the palace door was locked, all the news they were all isolated within the palace gate. The couple waited for more than 2 hours. As soon as the palace door opened in the morning, King Wei and his wife couldn't wait to go into the palace to inquire about the news. After learning that Xian Yuanyan had been imprisoned in the prison of the Ministry of Punishment, their expressions changed and they kept talking without stopping for a moment. "Go and see the Supreme Emperor. It's a pity that the gate of Yong'an Palace is closed tightly, and no one can be seen by the Supreme Emperor." At that moment, King Wei and his wife really felt what despair felt like. Unfortunately, there is no regret medicine in the world. King Wei, who had been rejected, finally realized the current situation. He was ill and went to the doctor to see Prince Jing and Prince Huai, and even several old princes from the royal family. However, the assassination case in the imperial study was not a trivial matter. Even though the Dongling royal family had rarely there was a prince who was executed, and no one wanted to get involved in such a thing this time. For the King Wei's family's constant attempts to commit suicide for more than a year, they could only sigh, and finally shook their heads helplessly to express regret. While King Wei was angry, the uneasiness and despair in his heart also deepened. In the end, he had no choice but to lower his status and look for Prime Minister Xie. Since Xian Yuanyan was the grandson of the emperor, the Prince of Wei's mansion and the Xie family have been in opposition. The Xie family has never looked down on the Prince of Wei's mansion. After the Prince of Wei's mansion failed to win over Prime Minister Xie many times, they also developed strong hostility and dissatisfaction with them. The Prince of Wei and his son even secretly swore that as soon as Xian Yuanyan ascended the throne, the Xie family must disappear from the imperial capital. However, things are unpredictable. Xian Yuanyan did not become the emperor, and now the Xie family is still prosperous, but the Prince of Wei's mansion is about to face the fate of decline and disappearance. So it is conceivable that Prime Minister Xie, who has always looked down on the Prince of Wei and his son, how could he let them off in this matter? Besides, the case was investigated by his son, and Xian Yuanyan's selfish and stupid behavior would implicate Xie Jin and be held accountable. Prime Minister Xie would never pay attention to him even if he was crazy. Facing the King of Wei's surrender, Prime Minister Xie only said one sentence: "If the King of Wei can revive those guards, I can ask for mercy for Xian Yuanyan after the regent comes back and save his life." This sentence made people choke. The King of Wei returned empty-handed, his face was ashen and depressed. On the other side, the Princess of Wei went to the Dajhan Palace to ask to see the princess but was also rejected. For the first time in their lives, the couple truly experienced the feeling of having no one to turn to for help. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 555. Time flies by so busy, and it's New Year's Eve in a blink of an eye. The Queen and the Regent are not in the palace. This year, the ministers do not have to go to the palace to watch the New Year. They also do not need to go to the palace to pay New Year greetings on the morning of New Year's Day. They all spend the New Year with their families at their respective residences. For the King of Wei and his wife whose son is imprisoned, the only purpose of this festival is to manage relationships, from the royal family members to the powerful chief ministers, prime ministers, and ministers, and even Fang Lan, who has not been seen in public for a long time. Ye had no choice but to enter the palace for the first time after getting married, under the arrangement of Princess Wei, and knelt outside the Dajhan Palace, begging to see the princess. No one is destined to have peace of mind in this new year. Xian Yuan 11 sat on the low couch, holding the 10-month-old Hao in his arms, and couldn't help but kiss his chubby little face. "Hong Yi, you and I can take care of little Bao here peacefully, which can be regarded as a peace of mind." Chu Hong I said nothing, but she agreed in her heart. The things Xian Yuanyan committed this time were so big that even the Supreme Emperor refused to meet him. The King of Wei and his wife have realized the seriousness of the situation. During the Spring Festival, when all the officials are off for the New Year, he will definitely use all methods ask people for help. Prince Huai's mansion and Prince Jing's mansion must be two mansions that he would never give up. Chu Hong I didn't like making noises, and even more hated dealing with things that she knew she couldn't do but had to do. Even Fang Lanyi was kneeling in front of Dajhan at the moment. She was extremely annoyed by her requests to see the eldest princess outside the palace. In the imperial capital, the Taizhung Palace may only be able to enjoy peace for a few days now. "Look at how good looking our Hao is." Xian Yuan 11 looked tenderly at the beaming little Hao wearing a red coat in his arms. "He looks like a prince, and he is exactly the same as his father." Of the 10-month-old baby has fair and tender skin, a round and cute little face, and a pair of big clear eyes like glass. However, he seems not to like to smile naturally, and his eyebrows are noble. At first glance, he does look like Rong Yu. Like a smaller version of the Prince Regent. Chu Hong I's son is 6 months old, 4 months younger than Hao. He is also as beautiful and delicate as a porcelain doll. Looking at these two children every day seems to make people forget all their worries and become invincibly happy. Chu Hong'ai agreed with her words. Maybe some people are born with a good temper. The little prince is obviously still an ignorant baby, but his facial features are exactly the same as Rong Yu's. He doesn't like to smile much by nature. Of course, he has rarely been seen crying. He is very quiet. A child who doesn't like to cry or laugh will give people a sense of calmness and coercion. Although he is only 10 months old and can't be said to be coercive, there are some things that really can't be explained. Her Majesty the Queen and the Prince Regent should come back before your Highness's second birthday. Chu Hong'ai frowned. When they come back, they will resolve all the matters that need to be resolved and the court will be in peace. Xianyuan 11 glanced at her with a hint of smile. You want the regent to come back early so that you can reunite with Qi and his wife. Chu Hong'ai calmly betrayed her husband. It's Xianyuan Qi who has never been happy. Xianyuan 11 raised his eyebrows when he heard this. I don't like to hear this. When Rong Yu made this arrangement, he didn't object. Be opposed to? Chu Hong'ai's expression paused slightly. Who dares to resist the regent? Xianyuan 11 couldn't help but laugh. You don't dare to resist, but you dare to be dissatisfied in your heart. Chu Hong'ai thought of Xianyuan Qi's resentful and dissatisfied eyes, and couldn't help but raise the corners of her lips. He only dares to be dissatisfied in his heart. After all, there seems to be no one who dares to say no to the regent's decision except Her Majesty the Queen so far. The two chatted incessantly, ignoring Fang Lanyi who was kneeling outside. Princess Wei thought that the eldest princess would not have the heart to let Fang Lanyi kneel down for such a long time because she was a fragile daughter. However, Xianyuan Yan's case was difficult to save, and Xianyuan 11 knew the purpose of her coming and knew that after seeing her, I couldn't help her, so I wouldn't do anything unnecessary. As for how long Fang Lanyi had been kneeling outside, no one would care. He would leave if he couldn't hold on any longer. He couldn't risk his life. Due to the special circumstances, this Chinese New Year is destined to be spent quietly, and there is no way to lively with the family. Of course, even if there is a chance to reunite with the family, there is probably no way to experience the excitement. Because compared to the quiet ears of the eldest princess and Chu Hong'ai, the royal family who were annoyed by the Wei Wan couple because of Xuanyuanyan would rather find a place to hide for a while, especially King Huai and King Jing, who were simply annoyed and unbearable. It's disturbing. The King of Wei and his wife tried every possible method, contacted all the people they could find, threatened, lured, and groveled, and they exhausted all available means. Probably they had never done so much for something in their lives, and finally forced them to do so. All the ministers had to order the doors of their homes to be closed and no one could be seen. I even skipped the New Year greetings on the morning of the first day of the Lunar New Year and stayed at home eating dumplings with my wife, children. This continued until the morning court resumed on the 6th day of the lunar month. Under the pressure from the tough attitude of the Xie family and his son, no one dared to intercede for the King of Wei and his wife. The case about Xianyuan Yan has basically been settled. The beginning of spring this year is the first year of the year. During the first month, there are warm spring weather for several consecutive days. The sun is bright and the wind is gentle. It makes people feel so comfortable that they don't want to do anything. They just want to sit in the garden drinking tea, admiring flowers, and basking in the sun. It's a pity that I have such an idea, but I don't have this life. Xiejin not only had to ensure that Xianyuan Chen and the eunuch Zhang Yin were safe and sound while they were recuperating, but also had to prevent anyone from causing trouble for them. He also had to be single-handedly responsible for the affairs in the imperial study room, and was so busy that he could hardly touch the floor. Because the plan had changed, when Chu Nanyi gave Xiejin acupuncture for the last time, he told him calmly, Mo Lingan told me this morning that the master is coming back. Hearing this, Xiejin subconsciously raised his eyebrows. So soon? I thought you would be shocked. Chu Nanyi glanced at Xiehuli's calm expression, then lowered his eyes. Not so soon, the court is in chaos after just a few months away. If the master had been away for a year, he might have replaced the throne of Dongling after he came back. Xiejin was silent for a moment. Nanyi. What's the matter? If you have time recently, you can prepare more medicinal materials for external injuries. Xiejin lowered his eyes slightly and stared at the silver needle on his arm. Need just ask for the amount you want, but let's make it clear that you don't want any internal medicine. You know I can't drink decoctions, so it's a waste. Just take external medicine, with better efficacy. Do I need that little bit of your money? Xiejin paused. In addition, if the master doesn't take the initiative to summon Xian Yuanyao after he comes back, then no matter what happens in the palace, it must not be spread to the western suburbs military camp. Chu Nanyi looked at him in surprise. You want me to block the news under the master's nose? It's not that serious, Xiejin said in a light tone. According to the rules, news from the court should not be spread to the military camp. You just need to prevent someone from deliberately sending news to the military camp. Window. Tabula equals window. Tabula. Tabula.push, mode, thumbspeed -01, container, tabula below article thumbnail -300x250, placement, below article thumbnail -300x250, target. Type, mix. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 556. Chu Nanyi thought for a moment and was quite worried about his situation. If it's an internal injury, I'm afraid it won't work without taking medicine. Xiejin frowned and looked at him. Can't you hope that I will be better? What do you say? Chu Nanyi smiled. Aren't I worried about you too? It's better to be prepared in advance than to be caught off guard. I heard that if the imperial staff hits someone hard, it can maim someone. It's possible. Get out, Xiejin said in a calm tone. Don't appear in front of me again. I will be annoyed when I see you. Chu Nanyi ignored his words and slowly took away the silver needle. She lowered her head to check whether the remaining poison had been completely removed. I just want you to have a bottom line. It's useless for you to be so hostile to me, and it can't help you alleviate it. Crime. After a pause, he sighed. To be honest, if the Lord's heart is not as cold and hard as iron, just me and Xian Yuanyao, plus Xian Yuanqi, Amo Lingan, the few of us will go to the front row of the Lord. Kneel down, beg for mercy, hug your legs and cry a few words. Maybe you can reduce your guilt by half, but you know, our Lord is like this. If you really want to cry and beg for mercy, I'm afraid you won't die in the first place. There's nothing left to live for. Holding the master's legs and crying? Such a scene is simply unimaginable. Xiejin looked at him as if he were a fool. Don't embarrass me here. Get out of here when you're done and prepare your medicinal ingredients. Do you need your mercy? What a joke. Chu Nanyi smiled narrowly. Aren't you worried that the delicate Master Ju can't bear the punishment? After all, compared to the young general who was trained in a small military camp, your body is truly delicate and raised in a heap of splendid things. How ugly would it be to cry in front of the Lord? Xiejin was always elegant and calm, and he couldn't do things like throwing things, otherwise he would have beaten Chu Nanyi out with a pillow or a broom. Chu Nanyi packed up the medicine box and returned to the topic. During the new year, the Wei Palace moved frequently. Even officials from the Fang family secretly moved around for Xian Yuanyan, but in the end they returned without success. I thought that after the Lord returns, the court has to be cleaned up again. Xiejin's eyebrows were deep. Foolish people are still wasting food while they are still alive. But there is a question that you have thought about, Chu Nanyi asked calmly. It has always been a taboo for the Dongling royal family to kill each other, but this generation has caught up with the empress supported by the high priest to take power. If the master goes on a killing spree at this time, Will it catch people's tongue and cause dissatisfaction among the royal family? Xiejin sneered, whoever dares to be dissatisfied can give it a try. Hearing his tone, Chu Nanyi couldn't help but twitch the corner of her mouth slightly. Xiejin, you are only a 5th rank official now, can you stop talking so arrogantly? Xiejin glanced at him and said calmly, the Wei Wang family is seeking death on their own. The things Suan Yuanyan committed are punishable by death. This is not fratricide. Anyone who dares to say that this is fratricide is deliberately confusing right and wrong and should be punished. Chu Nanyi was speechless for a moment. Xiejin got dressed, walked to the mirror and took care of his appearance. I still have many things to deal with, so I won't let you have lunch. Please do as you please. After saying that, he turned around and walked out. Chu Nanyi walked out with him. The always elegant and graceful young master rarely said something awkward, you should behave well, otherwise the crime will be increased. Xiejin turned his head and glanced at him, his eyes narrow, why are you looking so hard at me? You seem to be really looking forward to me being dealt with. The smile on Chu Nanyi's lips was just right and gentle, your illusion. Xiejin sneered. On the 16th day of the first lunar month, Rong Yu and Nan 11 drove from the capital of the Zhou dynasty. Because the weather was fine and comfortable, Rong Yu still didn't waste the good time he could take Nan 11 to see the scenery, and it took half a month to arrive at the border of Dongling. Originally, according to his idea, he could take Nan 11 to play until mid-February. After all, after returning to the palace, he was tied up with a lot of court affairs, and it would be difficult to get out again in a year and a half. He wanted Nan 11 to have fun and return to the palace before Hao's first birthday. But plans don't change as quickly as they do. A letter sent from a flying eagle to Xu Shengsheng ended the romantic journey back between him and Nan 11. What's wrong? Nan 11 stood on a rock, looking at the coldness clearly visible in Rong Yu's brows and eyes, and couldn't help but frown. What happened in the imperial capital? Rong Yu handed her the unfolded letter in his hand. Nan 11 lowered her eyes and finished reading, and the expression on King Gli's gentle face gradually faded. The Prince of Wei's family seems to be particularly keen on going to the road of death. They will not give up until they reach the underworld. If you want to die, let him do it, Rong Yu said in an indifferent voice. This time I can go back and do some cleaning. Nan 11 tore up the letter in her hand, raised her fingers, and the fragments flew into the wind. Her eyes slowly moved up from the endless valley at her feet to the vast blue sky in the distance. She sighed and said, go back to the palace earlier. If you delay any longer, Hao may not know our parents. Rong Yu hummed, I'll come out to play again when I have the chance. Nan 11 turned her head and couldn't help but reach out and pinch his face. My incomparable noble husband and regent, you should focus more on the important affairs of the government and stop thinking about it all day long. Rong Yu grabbed her hand, put it to his lips and kissed it. From the powerful officials to the common people, no one will just work for 360 days a year. There must be time to rest, otherwise they will die prematurely. What to do if he dies? No nonsense. Nan 11 was sensitive to the word die early, and she especially didn't like to hear it coming from his mouth. But you have worked hard for more than 10 years, so of course you can take a break once in a while. After a pause, I can't be lazy anymore after returning to the palace. I have to share some of the burden for you. Rong Yu couldn't help laughing when he heard it. 11 who is sharing the burden for whom? The throne is obviously hers. Nan 11 glanced at him sideways, her tone calm and leisurely. You seem to have a lot of opinions. You haven't been holding back your dissatisfaction for so long. Rong Yu's smile deepened. How dare I be dissatisfied? What if 11 gets angry and ignores me? Nan 11 also laughed. But after a while, she slowly stopped smiling, her voice cold and quiet. It doesn't matter how the Wei Wangfu tosses around on weekdays. It won't cause any big waves anyway. For the sake of the emperor, I can be as tolerant as possible to Xianyuan Yan. but when it involves innocent lives, it can't be covered up by a few days in prison. Wrong, you didn't say anything. He understood Nan 11's bottom line. The matter of the imperial seal could be regarded as treason, but whether to punish or not was just a matter of the king's decision. If no one knew that the imperial seal was stolen, the matter could be covered up and a minor punishment could be given as a major warning. But those lives must be accounted for no matter what. Window. Tabula equals window. Tabula. Tabula.push, mode, thumbs feed -01, container, tabula below article thumbnail -300x250, placement, below article thumbnail -300x250, target. Type, mix. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 557. Go ahead and shorten your trip. On the 9th day of February, Her Majesty the Queen and the Prince Regent returned to the imperial city. When he left a year ago, he was a simple man, but when he came back after the year, Xie Xiaofu and Prime Minister Lu led all the civil and military officials to grandly greet him outside the palace gate. As for how they knew about the emperor's return to the palace, someone had to tell them specifically. Although the queen's car is still simple and low-key, without any ostentation of luxury, the procession in front of us to welcome the Holy Queen is really shocking. Lin Jie, who was sitting in the carriage, didn't think it was anything at first. Along the way, she talked and laughed with Nan 11. Nan 11 didn't have any airs during the chat, so that for most of the month, she almost forgot that Nan 11 was the identity of Queen Dongling. But the scene before her was no stranger to her. During the royal palace banquet of the Great Zhou dynasty, civil and military officials would also bow to the emperor and empress in the same formation as before. The scene in front of me was even more powerful than then. Because as long as Rong Yu is around, no matter what the occasion is, the solemn and tense atmosphere will make people hold their breath involuntarily, and a strong sense of oppression will always follow. Lin Jie even wondered if she needed to get off the carriage immediately and kneel down to salute with the Dongling court officials. But Nan 11's eyes stopped her. Don't be nervous. Nan 11's tone was still gentle, like a clear spring in spring, with a soothing force. We will go directly to the palace later. Lin Jie pursed her red lips and nodded slowly. Nan 11 opened the carriage and saw Rong Yu sitting on a tall brown horse. Civil and military officials and royal family members were kneeling in 2 rows on the left and right. There was enough space in the middle for the carriage to pass. After lunch, Xie Xiaofu, Prime Minister Lu and the Minister of the Ministry of Justice will go to the Qinzhen Hall to discuss politics with the king. If other adults have something to report, they should go to the Qinzhen Hall to wait. Rong Yu looked at the group of ministers and spoke indifferently. Pressing, Your Majesty and I are away from court, thank you for your hard work. The ministers said, I dare not express my suffering. Rong Yu was non-committal and said calmly, let's leave it at that. If we have anything to do, we can discuss it at the Qinzhen Hall. He was always concise and taciturn in front of everyone. After finishing his words, he gently raised his hand. The carriage drove slowly towards the palace gate. All civil and military officials bowed to see him off respectfully. The carriage drove all the way to the Dajhan Palace. Rong Yu helped Nan 11 get out of the carriage and walked into the main hall with the palace people kneeling respectfully. When they entered the hall, they saw the eldest princess standing at the entrance of the hall holding Hao, who was almost 1 year old. With a bit of teasing on his face, are you finally willing to come back? Chu Hongyi knelt on one knee. General Chu, please get up. Nan 11 chuckled, you have worked hard these past few months. Before entering the palace, I had already sent someone to deliver a message to Prince Jing's mansion, asking my cousin to pick up your mother and son back to the palace. But wait a moment, let someone prepare a meal. You and your wife should stay in the palace for lunch before leaving. Chu Hongyi thanked her, stood up and stood aside. Nan 11 turned to look at Hao. Her eyebrows were gentle, Her eyes were carefully studying her son whom she hadn't seen for several months, and the corners of her mouth were very gentle. How has grown so big. As he spoke, he reached out to take it and kissed his son's little face hard. How is getting better and better as he grows, but I really want to kiss my mother. Wrong you couldn't help but feel a little tasteful. Wrong you, look at it. Nan 11 pointed her son's little face towards Wrong you. Does my son look like you? Wrong you looked at the outline of Hauer's eyebrows that resembled his own, and the sour feeling in his heart immediately disappeared. Like he took his son over and touched his head. Hauer has been raised well, my mother-in-law has taken the trouble. The November child's eyes were clear and ignorant. Even though he hadn't seen each other for several months, he didn't face any rejection from strangers towards Nan 11 and Wrong you. He still looked like his usual stable demeanor and full of magnanimity. The eldest princess sneered, "This is my grandson, shouldn't I bother?" Wrong you was speechless for a moment. Okay, the eldest princess took Hauer, you have just come back. You should be tired. Go wash up, change clothes, eat something, and then rest for a while, huh? This is. Her eyes slowly fell on the girl next to Nan 11. The eldest princess stared at Lingia for a moment before slowly recognizing her, Princess Lingia of the princess's palace. Don't blame her for not being familiar with Lingia. Firstly, because she had been back in Tangling for more than a year, she had forgotten many people in Dazhu. Secondly, she was not very familiar with Lingia at first and had met few times. Now she was vaguely searching for Lingia in her memory. Apart from his impression of this girl, it was because Nan 11 had a good relationship with Lingia later, and Xianyuan 11 happened to meet her once. I've met Nan, I've met the eldest princess. Lingia knelt down and saluted. My daughter Lingia will be a citizen of Dongling in the future. Will they become Dongling people in the future? Xianyuan 11 looked at her daughter in surprise. We'll talk about this later. Nan 11 turned around and ordered the maid, first, take Miss Lin to settle down and prepare a quiet and comfortable palace for Miss Lin to live in. Then we will transfer 2 nuns and 4 maids from the inner court to take charge. Take care of Miss Lin's daily life. And Su respectfully agreed and took 2 people to arrange Linjia's residence. Xianyuan 11 and Chu Hongii carried their children back to the side hall without wasting Rongyu and Nan 11's time. Yunyu prepared a change of clothes, bath essence and other supplies, and served Nan 11 to take a bath while the others went to prepare lunch. The palace people quickly became busy as the 2 masters returned. After Rongyu briefly washed himself, he went to the imperial study while Nan 11 was bathing. As the voice of the regent has arrived sounded, people knelt inside and outside the imperial study. Most of the guards were outside the imperial study, while inside the imperial study there were only Xiejin, Xianyuan Chen, the eunuch holding the seal, the eunuch holding the pen, and a young eunuch in charge of serving tea. Rongyu stopped outside the door, his eyes slowly swept over the guards kneeling on both sides to salute. The invisible pressure in his eyes brought an indescribable sense of suffocation, overwhelming, making people unconsciously lower their heads and hold their breath. Where is Commander Yang? Reply to the regent, Commander Yang is patrolling dash. Send him to the imperial study. Yes. One of the guards hurriedly got up and left, while the others still lowered their heads and dared not speak. Get up. After saying these 2 words lightly, Rongyu stepped into the imperial study. The strong sense of oppression followed his tall and thin body into the imperial study, so dense that it made people breathless. How many guards died in the assassination in the imperial study? The cold and steady voice fell into his ears, and the people in the imperial study all held their breath. The eunuchs who held the seal and the eunuchs who held the pen were so frightened that their faces turned pale and they didn't even dare to look up. Who was this question about? Others present didn't know, but Xiejin knew it in his heart. However, at the same time, Xiejin suddenly realized that he had made a fatal mistake. He couldn't help but frowned, and he answered calmly, 5. What are their surnames and names? Rong Yu walked to the back of the imperial desk and sat down. Whose sons are they? What is the standard for the pension? Have you sent people to comfort the families of the deceased guards? The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 558. A series of questions were asked calmly from Rong Yu's mouth, with a pressing tone, which was a very rare phenomenon. It is enough to represent the displeasure hidden under the calm face at this time. The imperial study became increasingly quiet. If Xiejin was still interested in joking with Chu Nanyi in a somewhat relaxed tone before, now he was completely in no mood to joke at all. His most fatal mistake was not losing the jade seal or neglecting his duties, but despising the lives of others. Xiejin lowered his eyes slightly and landed on the richly patterned carpet in the royal study. His usual cynical expression was completely restrained. He couldn't answer any of these questions. This has never happened before. Even if he can't claim to know everything about the world, Xiejin definitely has many more holes in his chest than the average person, and he has more information than others. The reason why he knew nothing was because he never thought about understanding the situation of these guards from beginning to end. Except for Xiejin, everyone else should step aside. Rong Yu slowly raised his eyes, looking past the imperial case and landing on Xiejin's lowered eyebrows. His voice was indifferent. Commander Yang will arrive later, let him wait outside. The three chamberlains, with cold sweat on their foreheads, were relieved and cautiously stood up and retreated. Xian Yuan Chen was silent for a moment, as if he wanted to say something, but the atmosphere was too depressing at this time, and it was obviously not the time for him to speak. Xian Yuan Chen also retreated. Rong Yu flipped through the memorial on the case casually. Since the Queen and the Regent were not in court, if the civil and military officials had something to report, they would submit it in the same way as a memorial. Xiejin and Xian Yuan Chen, who were on duty in the imperial study, were responsible for reading it. At their current level, they only have the right to inspect and screen them. Sort out the excerpts that are just nonsense and the excerpts that are all nonsense, and mark the excerpts submitted by the officials into grades according to the criteria of priority: urgent matters that need to be decided, important matters, generally important matters, and not too important and not urgent. Decision matters. Urgent matters that require urgent decision-making are presented to the Prime Minister at the meeting, and the Prime Minister and the adults in the cabinet discuss and make decisions together. Xie Xiaofo has full authority to decide matters concerning the military department. After the decision is made, the eunuch who holds the seal will be responsible for stamping the seal. Only after these procedures are completed can the matter be considered completed without any confusion. Rong Yu took a quick look and found that the memorials on the case were all presented today. Most of the things before today had been completed and there was nothing to present. Putting down the memorial, Rong Yu said in an indifferent tone, "You don't know how to answer these questions I asked." Reporting to your lord, Xiejin couldn't help but light 3 sticks of incense for himself in his heart. "I have neglected to understand, please punish me, lord." Lack of understanding. Rong Yu's eyes were cold. "So you don't know who they are, and you didn't go to ask about it personally after you paid attention to the blonde hair?" Xiejin furrowed his brows carefully, and said in a fairly steady tone, "Yes." "Why didn't you ask?" Rong Yu's voice was tainted with a hint of coldness. "Do you think the lives of a few guards are worthless and not worthy of your concern at all?" Xiejin's fingertips trembled. He wanted to deny it, but he found that he couldn't refute it. He indeed never cared about a few human lives. The death of those guards only meant dereliction of duty to him, and the rest. He didn't have any other ideas. They are imperial guards. If you die while guarding the palace or escorting a chariot, I will not hold you responsible, because that is a risk that exists within the scope of their duties. Rong Yu's voice was calm and showed no emotion or anger. Just like a soldier losing his life, the battlefield is also a risk they will face at any time within the scope of their duties. But tell me, should these guards have died? Xiejin was silent for a moment, then quickly said, that shouldn't be the case. Because the assassination was not a real assassination, those few guards died because of their own people's calculations. Being stabbed by one of his own people, he died unjustly. The most unfair thing is that that clumsy scene should never have happened. If you were in the Imperial study room at that time, would they have died? In fact, Xiejin would rather wrong you convict him directly than say questioning like a master's words to his students. The pressure increased step by step, and for the first time in his life, he experienced the feeling of being overwhelmed by Mount Tai. No, he said, if I had been in the Imperial study room, nothing would have happened. Seeing that he admitted simply, wrong you didn't press any further. He leaned back slightly and said in a more casual voice, so the responsibility lies with you. Yes. But when the assassination in the Imperial study happened, you were recuperating in the mansion. This was an accident that no one expected. Wrong you put one hand on his forehead, as if to find an excuse for Xiejin to escape responsibility. The one who assassinated you, has the murderer been caught? Xiejin's heart skipped a beat, and he already had a premonition of what Wrong Yu was going to ask next, so he could only answer, caught. What identity? Charlatan killer. The sweet-natured ninth master of the Xie family has no thoughts at all at the moment. He just answers whatever he asks. He seems to have completely lost all the comments people made about him in the past. Where is the killer? Xiejin pursed his thin lips and said, he has committed suicide by taking poison. Who is the mastermind behind this? Sulan Yu. Rong Yu narrowed her eyes and tapped the armrest of the chair with her fingertips. For the last question, please think about it before you answer it. Xiejin couldn't help but hold his breath, and then slowly exhaled, my lord has something to ask, and I will never dare to hide anything. When the assassin tried to assassinate you, with your skills, you couldn't avoid it? It was indeed a fatal question. Xiejin wanted to smile bitterly, but he couldn't. If you were not as skilled as others, and you really couldn't defeat the assassination and were poisoned, then all the things that happened inside and outside the Imperial study, including the injuries of Xian Yuanchen and the eunuch holding the seal, the loss of the jade seal, and the 5 lives, I would not blame you. Xiejin moved his fingers slightly. At this moment, he clearly felt the coldness of his palm, without any temperature. As long as he admitted that he was not as skilled as others and that the assassination and poisoning were not his wish, then all the mistakes could be written off and he didn't have to bear any responsibility. Because he was also a victim. But Xiejin knew that his skills could easily avoid the assassination. Poisoning could also be avoided. However, if he admitted it, Rong Yu's meaning was already very clear. The jade seal was lost, Xian Yuanchen and the eunuch holding the seal were stabbed, and the 5 lives, even the reasons for the stabbing and poisoning had to be explained together. The consequences will never be easy. So Rong Yu asked him to think it over before answering. If this happened to someone else, he might have admitted that his skills were inferior to others. The master personally gave him a chance to be pardoned. Who would be stupid enough not to seize it? But Xiejin's pride did not allow it. He even knew that Rong Yu actually understood everything clearly, and what he wanted was Xiejin's attitude. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 559. Perhaps it was only at this moment that Xiejin finally understood why Xian Yuanyao, the proud little leopard, the noble son of the royal family, could be so respectful and submissive to Rong Yu. Today's unhurried questioning, obviously without any anger, can make people feel chilly and oppressive from the bottom of their hearts. The questioning method forces him to face all his mistakes and there is no room for escape. Never set a punishment easily when you are not fully aware of your mistakes, or unwilling to admit your mistakes. Who can withstand such a method of questioning? Xiejin had always felt that he was mature since he was a child, and he was always good at intrigues with the bastards at home. But now he realized that all his cleverness and cunning had been completely defeated before he knew it. The air in the imperial study room is quiet. The way the two people talked and answered questions could not exaggerate the coldness and solemnity of the atmosphere. Xiejin quickly found his voice and could still maintain a calm tone. I deliberately let the assassination and poisoning happen. With my reaction, I could not only avoid the assassination, but also shoot the murderer to death on the spot. Rong Yu looked at him silently, his dark and unpredictable eyes filled with coldness. After a moment, he said, "I feel that you can no longer bear any more charges today, so I will leave other questions for later." The voice was cold and ruthless, making people feel cold on the soles of their feet. Xiejin couldn't help but want to smile again. It sounds like a perfectly normal statement, but the message contained in the words makes people feel chilled. Even though he knew that today would not be easy and he was mentally prepared, Xiejin still didn't expect that he would be in debt. "This afternoon, I will go to Kinzen Hall to discuss matters with you adults. You don't have to follow me." Rong Yu stood up and looked out the window at the sky. "I won't punish you too much for 5 lives. For the time being, I will kneel down for 5 hours to reflect. We'll settle the score again tonight." At the end of the inquiry process, the choice of taking or evading responsibility was given to Xiejin, and he chose to accept it calmly. The right to convict lies with Rong Yu, and Xiejin has no choice. But that's fine too. What if Rong Yu asked him how to deal with the mistakes of these 5 lives? He was afraid that it would take 500 yuan to solve the problem. However, let alone 500, the royal staff used by the palace was made of strong mahogany. If water was not released, it would not take 200 for him to kill the guards. But if you say less, it seems not sincere enough. Therefore, it is best for Rong Yu to directly convict him, so as to avoid Xiejin's embarrassment. Rong Yu quickly walked out of the imperial study room. Xiejin breathed a sigh of relief. The feeling of oppression dissipated as the door of the imperial study room was closed. The nerves all over his body finally relaxed completely, and his palms were already wet with sweat. But this relaxation is only temporary. 5 hours. Xiejin had never knelt for such a long time since he was a child. Even when Xian Yuanyao was punished by kneeling for making a bad joke, it was somewhat informal and the kneeling time was very short. But today, kneeling down for 5 hours is just the appetizer. Xiejin really smiled bitterly. He felt that he was in danger tonight. Commander Yang Rongyu stood outside the imperial study room and looked at the commander of the imperial guards kneeling on the ground. "What were you doing when the assassination in the imperial study room happened?" Commander Yang's expression changed, and he replied under great pressure, "I am patrolling the palace in my humble position." "Has the assassin been found?" "I have tried my best to investigate." "So, the result is that nothing was found." Commander Yang's face turned pale. "Yes. The palace of Aoki is heavily guarded. Before I left, I deployed a lot of defenses, but I let a young man sneak into the palace to assassinate me." Rong Yu's brows were covered with a layer of frost. "Commander Yang, you need to give me an explanation." Commander Yang leaned over and kowtowed, with cold sweat dripping from his forehead. "You know your guilt for your low position. Come here." Rong Yu's voice suddenly turned cold. "Commander Yang has seriously neglected his duties and caused major mistakes. He will be pulled down and beaten 50 times, and he will be imprisoned in the criminal department pending trial." Commander Yang's expression suddenly changed. Prince Regent. He thought that at most he would face a serious punishment for dereliction of duty. After the punishment, he would go home to recuperate. If it was more serious, he would be stripped of his leadership position. Unexpectedly, he would be imprisoned in the Ministry of Punishment for trial. Is the regent suspicious of him? Rong Yu ignored him and allowed him to be pulled down by a few cold-faced imperial guards. He turned to look at Xian Yuan Chen, who was looking down at him, and said calmly, "You guys go to have a meal first." After lunch, Xian Yuan Chen send the memorial to the Kinzen Hall, and then wait for the political discussion in the Kinzen Hall. Xian Yuan Chen responded respectfully. "Mr. An, go to the inner court and pick out a few tougher rattans, soak them in warm water, and bring them to the imperial study." Manager An was stunned for a moment, not daring to think about the purpose of this rattan, and quickly responded, "I obey the order." Xian Yuan Chen's heartbeat suddenly accelerated and he couldn't control it. "Rattan. Wrong, you didn't say much." After explaining what needed to be explained, he raised his feet and left. Prince Regent, Commander Yang came to his senses and hurriedly defended, "The humble position is unjust. The Imperial Guard has long been controlled by the Xie family and his sons. They used their power and position to quietly install their confidants. The Imperial Guard only listens to the Xie family." Rong Yu had already gone away gradually, ignoring his defense. Entering the Dajhan Palace, the palace garden is fragrant. Last year, Yin Yu led the palace people to open up a piece of land, and the flowers and plants planted emitted a refreshing fragrance in the gentle breeze. Rong Yu habitually stood alone in front of the palace gate for a moment, his eyes fell on the boundless blue sky, brushing away all the unhappy emotions in his heart bit by bit, adjusting his state, and then walked towards the main hall again. After taking a bath, Nan 11 changed into a comfortable and loose brocade dress, and was coaxing her son in the side hall. While enjoying the mother-son relationship with her son after a long time, she listened to the eldest princess talking about what happened in the palace. So when Rong Yu came back, she had a complete understanding of the cause and effect of the matter. The death of those guards was strange. Nan 11 raised her eyes and looked at Rong Yu, who walked into the side hall. Commander Yang is in charge of the defense of the palace. Unless he deliberately mobilized manpower to make the defense outside the imperial study empty, it is impossible for those guards to die so inexplicably. Chu Hongyi frowned. "I also suspect that Commander Yang has a problem." "He does have a problem." Rong Yu's voice was gentle, and his noble eyebrows showed the insight that he had already known it in his heart. However, when he walked to Nan 11 and took her from her arms, but changed the subject, "Are you hungry?" "Not bad. Are we having dinner now?" Nan 11 smiled. "My cousin hasn't come yet." As soon as she finished speaking, a respectful announcement came from outside. "Your Majesty, Your Majesty, Your Majesty, Prince Ji of Prince Jing's mansion requests an audience." Nan 11 couldn't help but smile. "You came pretty quickly." Author's words. "Yesterday I forgot to wish you all a happy Lantern Festival. The weather was too cold, and I didn't go to the Lantern Festival last night. I stayed at home and wrote in the warm bed. Although I know you are eager, things have to be done step by step. You can't start right after you come back, otherwise people will inevitably misunderstand that you are Olajan's stepmother." Yao Yao has to protest. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 560. On the first day when the Empress and the regent returned, the Dajhan Palace was undoubtedly bustling. It was like the new year. The table was filled with a variety of dishes, delicious and colorful. There were also many people at the table, including Rong Yu and Nan 11, the eldest princess, Xian Yuanqi, and Chu Hongyi, and Lin Jie, who was called to eat together after settling down. The topics discussed at the table were all light-hearted and interesting. "Qi, the one who felt the most wronged during your absence was Qi." The eldest princess laughed jokingly, teasing Xian Yuanqi, who was alone in the empty room with a lot of resentment. "You were forced to live alone with your lovely wife not long after your marriage. You must have accumulated a lot of emotions in your heart. Qi, do you want to take this opportunity to complain?" Xian Yuanqi raised his head silently. He had waited for several months, and finally waited for the day when he could enter the palace to take his wife and children back home, so he was particularly happy today. The annoyance of being annoyed by the Wei Wang family during the New Year holidays, and the resentment and dissatisfaction of living apart from Hong Ai finally disappeared. But when the princess mentioned it, he suddenly felt that the imperial court meal in his mouth was not delicious. Accusation. Xian Yuanqi quietly looked at a certain regent who was concentrating on feeding his majesty, and quickly retracted his gaze and said calmly, "Auntie, you are joking. It is the duty of a minister to share the worries and difficulties of the king. How can I be dissatisfied?" Joke. Accusation in front of the regent. He finally waited for this gentleman to come back and reunite with the couple in red. What if the regent was dissatisfied after the accusation and separated them for a few months? Would he jump into the river to commit suicide? No matter how dissatisfied he was, it was before today, and there was no need to mention it again. It would not do him any good to mention it. How can you not bow your head when you are under the eaves? Besides, the regent had just returned to the palace and had to deal with the mess that Xian Yuanyan had made. When he entered the palace just now, he heard that Commander Yang had been dealt with. The regent was probably not in a very good mood at the moment. Even if he was crazy, he would not run into the hands of the King of Hell at this time. Duty. The princess looked at Chu Hong'ai with a half smile. "Hong'ai, how sincere do you think your husband is in this sentence?" Just as Chu Hong'ai was about to speak, a crispy chicken leg was put into her bowl. Silently turning her head to look at Xian Yuanqi, Chu Hong'ai wanted to remind him that this was a meal with Her Majesty the Queen, and he had to know the rules when eating, and he couldn't be as casual as in the palace. But seeing that Xian Yuanqi didn't seem to have any scruples, he said gently, "You've worked hard during this period, eat a chicken leg to replenish your body." Chu Hong'ai could only be speechless for a while. But the princess couldn't help but answer the question. She quickly said, "Aki has always been very sincere." It was true that he was resentful and dissatisfied before, and it was also true that he was in a good mood now. It was true that he dared to complain in his heart, and it was also true that he didn't dare to accuse him in person. So Chu Hong'ai felt that Xian Yuanqi was indeed a very sincere person. "My wife still understands me." Xian Yuanqi couldn't help but pick up another piece of fresh fish for her. "Eat more." The corner of the princess' mouth twitched, not knowing what to say. As expected, the pot should be matched with the lid. Chu Hong'ai and Xian Yuanqi are really a perfect match. Lin Jie sat on one side with the princess, occasionally looking at Rong Yu who was feeding the empress in the first seat, and then looked at Xian Yuanqi who was as beautiful as a flower and caring for his wife. For a moment, he felt that he seemed to have become a superfluous person again. Fortunately, there was still the princess. Lin Jie lowered his head silently, no longer watching others show their affection like a self-torture. "If you really have dissatisfaction, you can raise it." Nan 11 smiled gently, and her beautiful and delicate eyebrows were calm and composed. "Rong Yu loves the people like his own children, and has a broad mind. He will consider the demands of the ministers again and again and try to meet them." Xian Yuanqi's expression was just like this. Loving the people like his own children, and having a broad mind? As expected, the regent in the eyes of his cousin is flawless. Xian Yuanqi coughed lightly and put down his chopsticks. "I am not dissatisfied, but I have a request. I hope that Her Majesty the Queen and the regent can show some grace." Taking advantage of the good atmosphere at the moment and Chu Hong'ai's meritorious service in protecting the little prince, Xian Yuanqi felt that it was okay to make some small requests at the right time. Nan 11 raised an eyebrow. "What request?" "There are not many things in the court for the time being. The court in Dongling is calm, and the foreign countries have temporarily settled down. I wonder if I can let Hong'ai stay in the palace to rest for a while." Nan 11 heard this, but shook her head slowly. "This is probably not possible." Xian Yuanqi's face changed. Nan 11 smiled lightly. "Chu Hong'ai, listen to the order." Chu Hong'ai was slightly stunned, then stood up neatly and knelt on one knee. "I am here." Xian Yu and Qi also stood up and knelt. Starting tomorrow, you will take over the position of the commander of the Imperial Guards and serve me from now on, Nan 11 said in a light tone. However, in view of your meritorious service in guarding the Dajhan Palace this time, I will grant you a 3-day holiday to rest well in the mansion, and enter the palace to accompany the Emperor in half a month. You need to be on duty for 3 hours every day. Do you understand? When this imperial decree came out, Xian Yuanqi and Chu Hongii were almost stunned at the same time. Is this an unexpected surprise? Enter the palace to accompany the emperor and take charge of the imperial guards? And you only need to be on duty for 3 hours every day? This is simply a good thing that you can't even dream of. Chu Hongii was the first to come back to her senses and bowed her head to thank him. I accept the decree and thank your majesty for your grace. Xian Yuanqi thought to himself, could it be that the regent also felt that it was unkind to separate the newlyweds, and felt guilty, so he gave them such compensation? The position of the commander of the Imperial Guards is simply too suitable for Chu Hongii. Chu Hongii originally held military power, but she was a woman after all, and now that she had a child, her focus would mostly be on the family. Military generals needed to stay in the barracks all year round. If there was a war at the border, they had no choice but to lead the troops. Although Xian Yuanqi unconditionally supported his wife to soar, emotionally speaking, it was naturally a happy thing for the family of 3 to stay together often, so holding the power of the Imperial Guards was an unexpected surprise for Chu Hongii and Xian Yuanqi. Not only did the power not decrease, but it was easier than when she led the troops before. And most importantly, Her Majesty the Queen said that she only needed to be on duty for 3 hours a day. The distance from the palace to the inner city palace was not far, and the time spent on the road was limited, which meant that Chu Hongii could stay at home most of the day. The previous dissatisfaction was completely dissipated from this moment on. Xian Yuanqi bowed his head sincerely to express his gratitude. I thank your majesty for your grace, and thank the regent for his grace. No need to be polite, Nan 11 smiled faintly. Get up. When Xian Yuanqi stood up, he quietly glanced at Rong Yu. When his eyes touched that cold and noble face, Xian Yuanqi suddenly felt a chill in his heart. Rong Yu did not raise his eyes, or even look at him. He took care of Nan 11 to eat and drink enough, and then he lowered his eyebrows and began to eat. His movements of eating were naturally noble and calm. However, the more indifferent and calm he was, the more the chill in Xian Yuanqi's heart slowly fermented, and it went straight to the top of his head. Window. Tabula equals window. Tabula. Tabula.push, mode, thumbs feed -01, container, tabula below article thumbnail -300x250, placement, below article thumbnail -300x250, target. Type, mix.